Chapter 3. On the Great Plain. Oreg shaded his eyes against the early morning snow dazzle on the plain and stared at the distant line of hills. There, he said, pointing. Maroo squinted. Faint against the faraway gray, she saw a dark vertical line. She knew what it was, a wooded gorge. There they would find trees for building and firewood, green food to eat, and fresh water from the hills. Such places were rare, but the people knew them all. They were long past the White Mountain now and out on the Great Plain. The plain was a vast, flat expanse, marshy in places and covered with moss and stunted trees that grew no higher than Maroo's boots. It looked empty, yet Oreg had navigated it and brought them within sight of the camping place he remembered. It took them half the morning to reach the gorge. They were a smaller group now, only the two hunters, Oreg and Vorka, Old Mother and her daughter, and the three children. The tribe had broken into several groups, one going up into the hills, another staying to fish by the shores of a lake, but all moving slowly northeast in the wake of the deer. Food was so abundant in summer that it was not necessary to travel in a large group. The young men were glad for the chance to lead, and everyone was glad to be away from the quarrels and closeness of the cave. As they walked, the familiar deer smell came to them on the wind. The reindeer passed farther to the north, following their ancient trails. The ground vibrated constantly under their hundreds of hooves. Sometimes a herd of bison or mammoths would appear in the distance, and sometimes they saw rival predators, wolves, wild dogs, or a lone wolverine near the entrance. To the gorge they found the skeleton of a horse, picked clean by scavengers. Inside the gorge was a different whirl, green and rippling with bird song. Water came sparkling down from a spring in the hills above. There were willows growing by the stream and a small grove of birch close against the steep rock face. They all ran to the stream and drank, then sat down to rest on the rocks and share chunks of cold deer meat. When they had eaten, the men began discussing where to build a hut. The children wanted to help, but Old Mother said, "We must find fresh food." Maroo brightened. Green food was welcome after the long winter months of nothing but meat and stored nuts. She fetched the grass bags the women had woven during the winter. These had long handles that could be carried over the shoulders, leaving the hands free to dig and scrape. There were bone-digging sticks and sharp flint cutters for each person. Maroo handed out the bags, one each for herself and Otak, a tiny one for Nime, and larger ones for her mother and grandmother. The men had already begun digging the base of the hut, close under the rock overhang. This was the hardest part of the work. They grunted as they swung the sharp antler picks, but for all their efforts, they were scarcely breaking the surface of the ground, which was still rock hard under the melting snow. Old Mother led her party deep into the wooded gorge, and the rhythmic sound of the picks gradually faded. The snow higher up the slopes was beginning to melt and run in rivulets and small streams down the sides of the hills, forming a huge marshy woodland at the bottom. They found the blue flowers with long and wet green leaves. The leaves were tough, but when the plant was dug up, it yielded a soft white root that was good to eat. Maroo ate several, enjoying the fresh, earthy taste. Nime came and helped with her own little digging stick. As they jabbed their sticks into the soft earth, beetles and worms were disturbed. Nime caught a beetle and put it in her mouth, but it was hard and bitter, and she spat it out. Maroo laughed as she tossed roots into her bag. "Beetles are no good to eat," she said. "Find some grubs." Maroo put up her head and sniffed the air. The gorge was full of damp, woodsy smell, moss and crushed leaves. The tang of the white roots and the crumbly earth, and mixed in with all these, Maroo thought she detected the faint smell of goat. I smell grubs, Nimue declared confidently, and trotted off. Maroo laughed. Grubs have no scent, she called. But a few minutes later, she heard Nimue squealing, Grubs! 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 Come quick! Maroo jumped up. Nimue was poking at a piece of rotting wood with her stick and popping things into her mouth. Everyone came running. Out of the soft, crumbled wood, fat, white grubs were scurrying in all directions. Quick hands snatched at them. Maroo grabbed and ate the grubs as fast as she could. They were soft and juicy with a sharp taste. Nimue laughed to see them run. When the excitement was over, Old Mother said she had seen some bushes with sweet leaves higher up one of the sides of the gorge. They followed her out of the wet valley bottom into the more open area below the snow line. They picked busily. Tikek, who was tiring because of the coming baby, stayed with Old Mother on the lower slopes, but the children climbed higher, scrambling over rocks and finding insects under loose stones. The goat smell was stronger here. A scatter of falling stones made them look up in time to see the rump of an ibex disappearing behind the rocks higher up. Otak's eyes sparkled and his hand moved instinctively to his small spear. He knew he could never catch an ibex, but he could not resist chasing them. The ibex were so beautiful. Two more, it appeared, their heads crowned with thick ridged horns curving back in a perfect arch. The children stared. The goat stared warily back. The children scrambled up the slope, and the ibex clattered a little higher. The children moved again, and again the ibex climbed higher. Nimue laughed. She loved chasing things, but then the two older children, caught up in the fun of the chase, climbed swiftly up the steep hill and out of her sight, the goats leaping away ahead of them. Nimue could not follow and went back wailing to her mother. Otak and Maroo stopped, panting at the top of the hill. The wind hit them as they reached the summit, almost knocking them over. They crouched for shelter behind a rock. The hilltop was bare and cold, scattered with outcrops of gray rock, and with large drifts of snow where the sun had not ventured. There was nothing here to put in their bags. Let's go back, said Maroo. It's cold. But Otak had heard something. He signaled to her to be quiet. Maroo listened. Between the loud gusts of wind, she heard a high, faint whimpering, like that of an animal in pain. The children looked at each other. Both were curious. Maroo signaled, Let's find it. They crept forward. Otak held his spear at the ready.